Okay, now that we have COnda installed, we can go a little further down into the installation, installing the SEAMM environment and GUI. And you can read through this, but I'm just going to start running these things. The first thing we need to do is make a environment for SEAMM, a COnda environment. This command will do that. It will create a new environment called SEAMM using COnda Forge to get the sources, and it will install SEAMM and SEAMM installer. So we want to run that. And what it first does is figures out all of the packages that it's going to need, and it asks us whether to proceed. We'll take the default yes. You may see that it then downloads lots of things that are already on my machine, so I don't see the downloads. It's doing the transaction and executing it, and it is going to be installing that, and it's done. It's installed that environment. To use the environment, we do COnda activate SEAMM, which is what it told us to do here. And now, if you look over on the left of my prompt, it points out what environment is being used. We're in the SEAMM environment, and that's where we wish to be. If we go back to the documentation, we did this step, activating the SEAMM environment, and now what we want to do is just run SEAMM install. So now we're going to run the installer as it requested, and it tells us the environment is SEAMM, but defaults to the current environment. That's correct, it's up to date, so that's fine, the installer. And now it's finding all the packages, and it's going to take it a minute or two because it has to search quite a lot on the internet to find all the packages, since SEAMM is not a localized thing. If other developers create a package, it will automatically be found and turn up here. The first time you do this, it takes quite a while, but it's going to store this information in a cache which is valid for a week. So for the next times we run this installer, if we need to, it'll be very much faster. So now we just sit here and let it get the cache set up. It's found all the packages, and it wrote the package database to this cache. And now it's installing the rest of the core, which is just the job server, and it's installing the plugins for SEAMM. Now, if you notice, it got to DFTB Plus, and now it's saying it's running the plugin specific installer for DFTB Plus. So the various plugins can have specialized installers. Usually what they do is they install the executable for you. If you happen to have an optimized version of the executable, you can go to the documentation and find instructions of how to change the ini file for SEAMM so that it'll use your version. But by default, it will install and use a version that's quite a reasonable version. So it's done that now for DFTB Plus. It also got the Slater-Costa parameters that DFTB Plus needed. It's gone on and installed a few more steps, and now with LAMPS it's again got a specific installer, and that's installing LAMPS itself. Each of these is being installed in a separate COnda environment. We'll see the list of them at the end. The reason for doing that is to keep them separated so that their dependencies don't interact with each other. That's the beauty of using COnda. We can have separate environments, install different programs, each in their isolated environment, and they don't interfere with each other. Okay, that's done. Now Mopac. Now at the minute we don't have an unlicensed executable for Mopac, so you'll have to follow the instructions in the installation section to get Mopac. Shortly we will have it installed like any other project. We just haven't gotten to that yet. Seems to be finishing up. Okay, it's installed Psi. Took it quite a long time. Okay, we're done. Now we can do our conda info -e to show the environments, and there you can see the SEAMM environment we had, and now it's created SEAMM, DFTB+, LAMPS, PACMOL, Psi4, and PyCrystal. Those are the extra environments that were put in place. Okay, now everything's installed. If you want to check that the installation is correct, or if things are getting out of date later on, this is the command to do it, SEAMM install the show. So let's run that. It tells us again the environment is SEAMM, so at least we're in the right place. And now it's just checking that the installer is the correct version. That shouldn't take terribly long. And then the next thing it will do is go through all of the core modules of SEAMM and check that what their versions are. Okay. And this table shows all of the core modules, the installed version, the available version, and a description. Not very good at the moment, but we'll make that better. And tells you the core packages are all up to date. It's now doing the same thing for the plugins. So here's the table with all the plugins, better descriptions this time. And it tells us that they're all up to date. And if you look in the various things, for instance, Psi4, it'll tell you what version of Psi4 is being used, PACMOL, so forth. So that's the end of this section. You've installed everything, you've checked it. If things get out of date over time, there are new versions released, then you would use SEAMM installer update to update them.